I'm in Winchester. It's a town that's just south of Ottawa, I guess about 30 minutes or so. And I'm with Greg Stubbings today, and Greg lives out in a farm, and he's managed to do some model railroading, which is quite interesting, in the attic of a... How old's your farmhouse?
Just under 100 years, Chris.
So it's quite a substantial old farm in Ontario, and we're up in the attic. And that's the only place, I guess, in these types of older structures where you could even think of putting a model railroad together.
That's right. With a coal bin and a 4-foot clearance in the basement, I had to rule that one out pretty quickly, and the main 2 floors of the house got claimed before I had a chance. So this was my opportunity here.
It's funny how that happens, eh? Now you're looking around this room up here, it looks like you had to do a bit of work initially before you could even think about putting a railroad in.
Well, it was pretty rough up here. It had been used before we bought it for storage, and at one time was a hired man's bedroom. Mm-hmm. And so to make it suitable, we did quite a bit of work on the floor and the walls, and I started construction in 1993.
Okay.
And so this is kind of where I'm at.
Where did you get your ideas for model railroading? When did it all start?
Well, it all started for me as a youngster, 3 or 4 years old, visiting my grandparents who lived across the way from the CNR station on Durham Street in Lindsay. Mm-hmm. And just the fascination of a train whistle brought me to the door, and I always kept track of the trains going by, and when I got a little bit older, I started to write down the engine numbers, and so that always stayed with me. And my dad had a minor interest in model trains, and I started reading Model Railroader probably as a 7 or 8 year old, and I decided I'd rewire my dad's layout to put in block controls, and from that point on I just kept going.
It's interesting for model railroaders. There's always a bit of history in terms of what struck them when they were young.
That's right.
And somehow that manifests itself some years later after you've had children and they've grown up into a layout in the layout room. This particular railroad, is this the first model railroad that you've built?
No, I had one in my parents' basement in Lindsay.
And this is when you were a teenager then, eh?
Teenager, and I built a little shelf layout when I was at university, a little switching layout.
Right.
And then in our first home in Brampton, I had a smaller layout. Again, Lindsay was the center of my universe for all my layouts. And then I moved that layout actually when we had a home right in Winchester, and then I dismantled that and started building this in 1993.
So when you identified this space and you found out basically what you had in terms of space, how did you go about planning what you were going to do in here?
Well, I always knew that I wanted to have Lindsay in my plans. All my layouts have been designed around my passion, which is modeling Lindsay Ontario.
Right.
I knew I wanted to do steam. I had always been an HO, other than having a tin plate Lionel set that I set up around the Christmas tree. But I knew that I wanted to have a layout that I could operate and represent the branch lines coming into Lindsay.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? What railroad it is, what lines came in?
It's a Canadian National set in October of 1957. It was a division point, and it had branch lines radiating to Haliburton to the north, Belleville to the east, Midland to the northwest, and Scarboro Junction to the south.
What sort of commodities moved along that line? Why was it there?
Forest products came south from Haliburton. There was the main revenue for the railway at that point was gravel coming out of the pits around Cobeconk and just outside of Aurelia, and the grain trains were the big part, where they would be come from the prairies, be offloaded at Thunder Bay now, and went by Laker to Midland, be offloaded there, and then loaded onto rail cars as the grain commission and wheat board made their sales, and the cars would start flowing from Midland through Lindsay and on to Belleville. They joined the main line there, and then off to Montreal, Quebec City, or to Portland, Maine for export shipments.
Mm-hmm.
So Lindsay was the division point. That was the crew change point. The main locomotive shops were there, and so that was the mainstay of the railway until the St. Lawrence Seaway came in, and then CNR routed cars differently. The passenger service started to shut down in 1958. The station closed in 62. They took out the operator, the switch engines, and virtually in Lindsay, there's, other than a short section of track at Memorial Park, there's nothing left of the railway town. When I started building in 1993, I chose an open grid system of bench work with risers, plywood, homosode on top of that, cork, and at that time I was using Atlas Code 100. I had salvaged some switches and track from a previous layout. In hindsight, that turned out not to be a great move, as I started to fine-tune not only my track work but my expectations on how locomotives operated, especially steam through dead frogs, and it just wasn't a smooth ride through some of those turnouts. And I've upgraded a number of them over the years. It was originally built as a block control. Some of the switch turnouts that you'll see around the layout are the old Atlas controllers that I had as a kid. Mm-hmm. They've stayed through. I switched over the layout to DCC in 2007. It's the NCE system. Peter Nesbitt from Ottawa kind of got me started on that system. I really like it. I know the paddles are a little bit large for some people, but I really like the simplicity of one button, one function. And since I installed it in 2007, I've loved it. It just opened up so many things, even on a small layout like this. It's been wonderful. NCE, the components have worked great. And certainly with sound. Sound had to be part of my equation. So all the locomotives have tsunami sound in it. There's a couple of diesel locomotives, more for variety than anything else. But for 57, Lindsay was largely steam at that point. So in terms of construction, I made a lot of progress when kids were really young, and then once they got into hockey and baseball, my layout time was probably an hour operating when the kids had gone to bed, and whatever energy I had at that point I used, and I think it shows that you can have a lot of fun operating a layout even if you're operating by yourself. And so that's given me a lot of pleasure and a lot of enjoyment out of the layout. I have a timetable and a sort of a sequencing of how I run the trains that follows the timetable that was in place for Lindsay. So what I do, Chris, is each operating session that I have, I try and record the dates. So for example, on this one, I started July 20th, and I would have started with the Moonlight way freight, which is a local, it's numbered 450. I record the engine that led the train, how many loads and empties, the caboose, when it left Scarboro Junction and through the various towns along the line. And then, you know, each night I might have a chance to operate a couple of trains or do some switching at industries or in the yards. And I record how many loads I moved over the operating session.
Where's that?
So the loads for that particular session, I moved 77 loads.
Okay.
There's 3 passenger trains in each direction. that kind of just get in the way of the freight more than anything else. Just to make sure we clear the lines to for the passenger trains to come through. I have assignment cards for the locomotives. I also, for the caboose, I have a caboose card, and I record the home base for that caboose crew.
And just looking at this system here, where did you get the idea for that?
So back when I first started operating the layout, I took a 1957 timetable from the CNR that I have on hand. I did a string diagram to try and, I had to move the numbers around a little bit to make it work in my scenario.
Right.
And then I got a sequencing so that the trains moved in a logical sense in the relative time period they would have on the prototype.
So what would normally run in a 24-hour
in a 24-hour cycle?
So you would come up and you would, you operate here, maybe yourself and a few people at the very most.
That's
right. You
right.
have a tendency to select a train that would have run during that period of time.
That's right. And
as an operator, you would build the train and run it through the sequence and finish it wherever it's supposed to finish.
That's right. And if it's late, I'm getting tired. You shut things off and you start it up when the spirit moves you, or you have a chance to operate another night. It's really relaxing after a day at work. If you just want to take the local wave freight out, you switch a couple of industries, and you tie up at the end point. There's lots of times where you start to operate, you find the switch points don't work the way they should be, and you stop everything and you fix it. Or you could feel like running trains and say, I'll ignore that, and I put a little notation here on my train sheet to say, don't forget to fix that switch point, and I'll go back and do that.
When I was looking at the timetable here, and there's quite a few towns.
That's right.
Now, do you model all those towns?
No, Scarboro Junction is modeled. Uxbridge and Blackwater are basically each side of the river, so those are modeled. Mariposa, which is on the other side of the scenic divider, it is modeled. Lindsay's modeled. Omemee has one siding. Peterborough, Belleville, Haliburton, and Midland are represented by staging.
A lot of dashes there.
A lot of dashes.
So basically, when you talk about the design of your operation, it's point to point?
It's point to point. We have trains coming in from Belleville to Lindsay. They'll be switched out at Lindsay for many of the branch lines, and the train will terminate in Scarborough, and vice versa, Scarborough through Lindsay to Belleville. We also have the grain trains and gravel trains coming out of Midland through Lindsay. Some of those will come up to Scarborough. At that point in time, they were building the 401. So gravel was a commodity that moved quite a bit out of a quarry in Utah, and also in Kirkfield Quarry. And so those trains moved through Lindsay and moved a lot of gravel to support the 401 building.
Excellent. Let's go and have a look at your staging area.
Okay.
So here we are in staging in a rather unique area in the house.
So this was mainly a lumber storage area when we first moved here, and kind of a construction area. I thought it'd make a great staging yard. At that time, Tony Custer was really talking about the value of staging, and so I wanted to have that on the layout. Unfortunately, it's a room built for somebody that's 5'7" or shorter to really be comfortable here. But I also wanted visible staging. I know I've operated on a number of layouts where it's hard to get at staging, so I wanted it visible. So when we do have operations, I'm sort of uniquely qualified to operate in this room because of my height limitations. So it works out perfect for me to work this yard. So basically we have Belleville here, which represents the eastern end of the line. This is where it would have rejoined the main line. This is where the grain trains will rejoin the main line and head off to Montreal, Quebec City, or Portland, Maine. And it generates a lot of traffic moving grain cars to and from Belleville. It also has a lot of merchandise cars that'll go to Lindsay and then up to the branch lines. Mimico is really the southern extreme beyond Scarboro Junction, Spadina, etc. I needed a place to put trains that were essentially going off the layout. So that's why Mimico and Belleville are paired.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side,
I notice over here too you have a turntable, which is quite handy, eh?
Yeah, that's a manual turntable. I need it to be able to turn the steam engines. I don't really like to handle them a lot by hand if I don't have to. And so it was just it's a turntable that was left over from, I think, a layout when I was a teenager. So I use it just by hand to spin the locomotives around and just get them all pointed the right direction. So you can see they're staged to head towards Lindsay.
Mm-hmm. What do you got on the other side?
On the other side, this represents Midland and Haliburton. So Haliburton would be a branch line on the extreme north. Again, we have a mixed train that runs daily. This is the Haliburton train that's ready to go. It's got a combine on the back. They used to have an RPO on it until about 1952, so I model in 57, so at this point it's got a combine.
So you try to get as close to the prototype
I
as
try
possible.
to. Obviously you have to make compromises. You know, when we're running a grain train out of Midland, it's probably 8 or 10 cars. The prototype probably would have been 40 or 50 cars.
Right.
So this yard is relatively empty right now, but in the operating session, there's about 3 trains coming this way early in the session. And similarly on the Belleville side, we only have 1 track open right now, and there really should be more openings because we have 2 trains coming this way again early in the session. So although when I built it I thought I had lots of staging, but I have the same weakness as most modelers. I have too many cars, too many engines, and not enough staging. So we'll have a look at Lindsay next and just get a sense of trains moving out of staging, through the wall, and around the corner, and we'll be in Lindsay. So Chris, we're just standing at the entrance to the Lindsay yard. So it's come out of Belleville, it's come around the layout, and it's coming through this cut of rocks under this this overpass. We've got the Lindsay switcher ready to put a couple of cars on the back of the train that just arrived from Belleville, and we'll switch out those cars, and that train will carry on to Scarborough.
So that you're coming into...
So this train here, from the last session, this one came just after midnight. It was a mixed train, merchandise train out of Belleville, and there's 4 or 5 cars to be dropped in Lindsay. The Lindsay switcher will pull off the van and pull off the back 4 or 5 cars that are destined for Lindsay.
So what you've got down there is the yard throat then?
The yard throat is here.
Yeah.
The Lindsay switcher's got 4 cars that are destined for the Uxbridge subdivision heading up to Scarborough.
Right.
And we have a train that's just getting ready to move into the station track shortly. And this train will be heading towards Midland with the passenger train.
It looks like the station that right there looks very, very close to the original Lindsay station.
That is, in later years it was all boxcar brown. I modeled this when I was probably about 15 or 16 years old, and I chose the colors that were in sort of the Grand Trunk time period. Probably when I get a chance I'll redo the modeling a little bit. I've had quite an interest in structures lately, so when I look at some of my earlier efforts, I think, well, I can do that better. So I may redo that one at some point in time, but basically, if you were to think about the concept of the layout, my grandparents' house would have been right about here, and so the idea is if I was sitting on my grandmother's porch, this is be the view I would have of all the trains coming through Lindsay.
Let's have a look at that view. So here I am, I'm on the grandmother's porch there just having a look out, and I can see that there's a train in town, and there's Greg there looking down at his railroad yard, the Lindsay yard. Lindsay also was a fairly important town in terms of industry.
Yes, at that point in time, Chris, there was a number of local industries that had manufacturing base in Lindsay. Sylvester Manufacturing is probably the most well known in terms of its railway maintenance equipment and speeders, etc. I've just got one siding where I have a Sylvester building, and it was an area where there was lots of little feed mills and petroleum depots and a freight house. So a lot of my traffic ends up at the freight house or the lumber yard or the local co-op. But the main thing that happens in Lindsay is really where I start sorting cars for the different branch lines. So you can see that I've got tabs on a number of cars for pickup for trains coming through. So these two tracks here, Chris, are where I'll have cars set out to join trains passing through town.
So they're kind of like an interchange tracks with
It's
different
really
branches.
like an interchange track for 4 subdivisions.
Right. And these are stub end tracks.
They're stub end tracks. This is where a lot of action. This is probably the busiest spot on the layout because of the 16 scheduled trains. Every one of them passes through Lindsay.
Mm-hmm.
The locomotive shop that's there is really a pretty poor stand-in for what the real one looked like. I'll get you to have a shot of the Lindsay shops as they should be modeled. Okay. I didn't have room to do the Lindsay shop the way it should look, but I did want to give the impression that you're changing locomotive crews there and changing locomotives. A lot of small steam for branch lines. So as we leave Lindsay, we've got a fairly steep and sharp grade here over the Scugog River, which was a river that ran just through Lindsay. We've got some fishermen and some canoeists here. It's a pretty steep and sharp curve here. It'll test the locomotives as they come up here. Many of the grain trains will be double-headed through this area. And we're coming to a little village called Mariposa, which was between the real towns of Little Britain and Oakwood. And Mariposa was basically a siding with a grain elevator, a feed mill, and a coaling dealer there. So once we climb this grade, we'll be into the little town of Mariposa. And as we move around here, Chris, we'll just get a view of the station and the siding. And at the end of the layout here, we have a small sheep farm to sort of represent what we're doing now in real life.
So you've used a nice divider here to give some more space and background to your whole railroad. Very nice.
This was a fairly narrow aisleway, so I guess that serves as my own weight control because I know it's pretty tight in here. So trains are coming up through Mariposa. Basically, they're climbing the grade. There is a set off here for a feed mill and then a coal dealer here. There's a express shed here and a passenger station. It's really a flag stop, drop off the mail, etc. It starts around the curve here. You've got an old schoolhouse, one-room schoolhouse with a outdoor privy, and it passes through a farmhouse, a farm, small sheep farm, tractor out work in the field, and we're heading into an area that was once covered over, and I decided rather than a long tunnel, I'd like to open it up.
So you have a passion for sheep farms.
I do. You'd think since I deal with sheep on a daily basis, it may not be something you want to model, but I thought it fit the scene.
So where are we heading next?
We're heading to Blackwater Junction.
All right. Looking along this back wall there, you can see that there's a scenic divider that covers the, looks like a small bridge in the middle there, and some trees along each side, which gives some length in running to the railroad after the train has left Mariposa. And now where's it heading?
It's heading towards Blackwater Junction.
Okay.
So the turnout that curves off to my left and goes through the wall, that would be a train heading towards Midland.
Right.
So that's where the grain trains and gravel trains will join the Uxbridge subdivision,
right,
and head around to Lindsay.
So in the other room in the staging, that was located to my left there.
That's right.
Where it crosses over. And then down below this trestle, that's the track coming out the other way from Belleville, right?
That's the Belleville track, and it's basically just giving me some running space along kind of a sheer wall, and it's on the bottom deck. On the top deck is the Uxbridge subdivision, and what we're looking at here is Blackwater Junction. You've got one line that goes off to Midland. You've got a passing track here. It's one of two passing tracks on the layout. There's two trains here. We have a run-through train that will go into staging on the main line, and on the siding is a gravel train that is destined to head to Belleville today, and just one small industry with a creamery and a feed mill.
Well, you're still getting a lot of stuff packed into a very small area. So you've got a passing siding, and here are your industries. And so on one side of the track, you've got your grain.
Grain is here, yeah, and the creamery is largely getting milk cans off a passenger train that drops off the cans in the morning and picks them up at night.
So that would happen right off the train then, basically?
Right off the train. As it pulls up to the platform, on the passing side, you've got a small little depot and a creamery. And then on the back track is sort of a team track and a grain elevator feed mill.
I notice you got this one double-headed.
This one's double-headed. It's a run-through train, so we sometimes it's just equalizing power, and in some cases it'll need it to head up the grade. In this particular case, it'll be heading down grade almost the whole way, so it's basically moving a second locomotive down to Belleville.
This layout design looks like a dog bone shape in terms of the way it bends back on itself.
I tried to use the space I had as effectively as I could. Having the staircase come up in the middle of the room presented some challenges. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to have some running room between the towns, and the folded dog bone seemed to fit my space the best. So on each end we have a river going through it. In this particular area, through this area, this would have been the Beaverton River. And so what I've got is I modeled Blackwater East, and on the other side of the river is Blackwater West.
Now we're going from Blackwater East around the bend and into Blackwater West.
So again, on the west side of our river here, we have a couple little sidings. We have a coal shed, we have a little team track, and we have a Swift packing plant. So I've got a couple of reefers lined up there for beef, pork, lamb to come out of cold storage or go into cold storage or for further distribution. Blackwater West is also the end of the passing siding and heads into Scarboro Junction at that point in time. On the prototype, Blackwater is about 20 miles out of Lindsay, and there's at least half a dozen more towns before you get to Scarboro Junction. I just ran out of room before I ran out of towns.
So now, where are we heading next?
So the trains now have come through Blackwater East and West, and they're coming into the yard throat at Scarboro. And in the prototype, it would have joined the main line here. We've got two lines here that would have extended through where I have a mirror, would have gone through Scarboro Junction, on through to Spadina, and then through to Mimico and further west. Mine stub ends here. The mirror is just to tell me that the trains would have moved on to Spadina or Union Station at that point in time. So I've got a passenger station here, a freight shed, and then a small yard here where trains can terminate. I keep one track for on company service, and then basically a couple of sorting tracks, and then the local for Lindsay will be assembled. I think there's a tag on it for the Lindsay local. That train will go out in the early hours of the morning. They called it the Moonlight, and it switched a lot of the industries between Scarborough and Lindsay.
So it gives you an opportunity to bring trains in and out and reclassify the cars to go to different destinations.
I really do enjoy switching, so I enjoy working this yard. It's actually an easier yard to work than Lindsay. You've got a little more room to work with, and you've got your shops, and of course I like the steam locomotives and the servicing facilities that are associated with steam, the water towers,
So this is quite largely modeled. Can you point out some of the models, the types of models that have been used here?
Well, the station itself is a Grant Knowles plaster cast model. It's suffered some abuse over the years with temperature extremes in the attic, and you can see where the roof is pulled away from the subroof in some areas. The water tower itself is a Tichy product. The coaling tower is a SS Structures Limited. It's I think it was called the Snow coaling tower. It's not too unlike the tower that was at Lindsay. And then the turntable is a combination of components. It's a hand crank turntable, and then I think it's a Helgen roundhouse that I've modified over the years just to make it a little unique. And then I've got a little ash pit and just a spot to put sand cars and coal cars.